Hello, welcome to Roussel Reads. I'm Deja, and today we are going to talk about curating my reading taste. This video actually came about because I was watching Izzy from Happy for Now talk about just bookish hot takes, and at the end, she was talking about how there's just a few things that she would like to see more. And she was talking about how a lot of people don't know their own reading taste and how they decide like how they pick up a book. And after like talking to a few people, I was like, oh, like I feel like we all do it differently. And so I'm here to like tell you like how I do it. And maybe that'll just help you get an idea for how you can start to do it yourself. So this video will have three sections. The first one will be like, how do I even find the books that I'm remotely interested in? The next one is, how do I even decide what to read? And then the last section will be, what is even my reading taste? This will definitely be a very chatty video, but I'm hoping that you guys get some value out of it and that you enjoy just seeing me chat. So this first section, how I find books. I feel like this, like a lot of my answers, has changed over the years. It used to be a lot of YouTube recommendations. I have been watching YouTube since I was in middle school. Like, I think when I was in middle school, booktube was really like starting to pick up, and a lot of the older creators that I was watching like, would always be posting like these recommendation videos. There would be like readathons and stuff happening, and that is a lot of where I got my recommendations. But most of the creators that I watch these days, they're not necessarily always reading things that I'm interested in. So YouTube isn't really where I find a lot of the books that I want to read. There's still a few YouTube creators that I follow that we do have similar tastes. So if they do start talking about a book and it starts to pique my interest, then I will put that on my TBR. But for the most part, BookTube is not where I get my recommendations. After YouTube, it was Instagram, but with the algorithm on Instagram, I'm seeing less bookish content, I feel like. So that's definitely not a place that I usually get recommendations from either. But recently, with Threads being launched this year, I feel like that is the place that I'm seeing a lot of the books that I add to my TBR coming from. Sometimes I will post on Threads and just ask for specific recommendations. I feel like the algorithm on Threads is definitely very interesting. Especially in the beginning, I feel like I was definitely able to find just a lot of just unknown authors to me. And then as you like keep like interacting with the things that you do like, I feel like it just starts to give you a lot more of those recommendations. I found so many Black fantasy romance authors on that space, and I've even found a lot of like closed door romance authors. And that is partly because like when you post on Threads that you're looking for something specific, a lot of people just come on and just give you recommendations that fit that like vibe. And I've had success doing that. That's how I discovered the Threads of Destiny author that I just read a few weeks ago. And so, yeah, I feel like the Threads algorithm and just like the community on there is very good at giving you what you want. And so, definitely where I'm finding a lot of the books nowadays. And then it's also just on NetGalley. Like, I just browse NetGalley to my detriment for my NetGalley score, but sometimes I just browse and I'll just see like just books that sound interesting to me. And I will say that like what piques my interest is of course having a Black person on the cover. I feel like I'm still in that like early 2020s like mindset that, oh, if it's a Black character, I'm going to support. Now I've gotten a little bit more stingy with that because while it may pique my interest at first, there's still definitely things that like I need to have in the book before I just up and go request it or up and go buy it, because unfortunately I can't just be supporting everybody Black, because as we've been getting way more Black authors being published, whether indie or traditional published, and in the traditionally published space is still not enough, but as we are getting more of these stories, I've had to be more particular with what I support, because just because they're Black doesn't mean that I'm going to love their story. And I recently came to that understanding. And the last thing that I'll say about this section is that I don't really find books by just browsing in bookstores or in the library. I mean, sometimes, but it's very rarely that I'll go to a bookstore and just browse and like pick up something, because I know that I am a very particular person in terms of like the writing that I like. And so I'm not just going to like pick up some random book at the bookstore and buy it. And sometimes when I am browsing at the library, like I'll see a book that I've never seen before, or I see a book by an author that I've heard of before, but not necessarily this book. But that's not usually how I find the books. So, just to wrap up this section, it is a little bit of YouTube, barely any Bookstagram, and a lot of threads these days, and just a dash of like browsing in the library. And so now that I have shared how I find the books that I may be potentially interested in, so this next section is how do I decide what to read? And one thing I didn't mention in the last section is that when I do come across these books, I don't necessarily do a deep dive into like what it is. I get my initial interest peak and then I add it to my Storygraph TBR or I take a screenshot, which is why I have way too many screenshots on my phone right now. I like to capture that, okay, I've heard of this book before. Maybe if there's something that like interests me about it, then I can come back and look more into it. And so most of the time I do refer to my Storygraph TBR when I'm trying to figure out, oh, what's an interesting book. I am a mood reader, so a lot of what I decide to pick up is just based on my mood, whether or not I want something super short or whether or not I have the time to really dive into something that's like deeper and requires more critical thinking. Like I'm thinking like a Karen Lauren book. Definitely need a little bit more energy to be able to really get into works like that. But that's really like one of the first things that helped me decide, okay, what am I going to pick up? I also create a TBR for myself. Now, as a mood reader, this probably sounds counterintuitive and it kind of is, but the thing with like my TBRs is that like I don't necessarily force myself to stick with them. It just helps me to keep books on my radar. So when I'm building my TBR, I'll go through my NetGalley shelf to see like what books are upcoming that I should probably get to, or if I have buddy reads that I want to continue or something. Like this is what goes on that TBR. And also as I'm making my TBR, I'll start like scrolling through my Storygraph. I believe Storygraph allows you to like filter by, oh, this is like the year, or filter by like this is the mood that I'm going for, like what books like fit into that, or if there's like certain genres, or like if you split it up into tags, the way that you can sort your TBR list, it can help you like figure out what do you want to read for that month. I'm also a very seasonal reader. I am definitely in the mood for more paranormal, like spooky reads, which I'm very excited about. And so like as I'm browsing through my Storygraph TBR or even through like my screenshots, then I'm just like, oh, like this could be like an interesting one. And I said earlier that like at the point that I start adding the books to my TBR or just taking screenshots of them, that like I don't necessarily like do a deep dive into like what these books are about. But as I'm creating my TBR is when I start to actually like dive into, okay, what is this book about? Is this something that I could be interested in? And so if I come across something like, oh, I remember seeing this book, like what is this about? And so then once that book has captured my interest again, then I will probably go to like the Amazon page, or if they are on like Smashwords or something, like I'll go there. I'll look at the synopsis, see if it's something that sounds interesting to me. If not, then I'll take it off the TBR right then and there. But if I'm just kind of like on the line on like whether or not like it could be interesting to me, then I'll read the first page or like the first few pages from the sample inside. But that's how like I start to like go through like, oh, this isn't like something that I think I would like. And so then I start removing them from that TBR. And this is like a very slow process. There's like definitely a lot of screenshots that I screenshotted that I'm still just trying to move to my Storygraph TBR so I can just capture them there. Because I started to screenshot books a little bit less, I'll just start adding them immediately to my Storygraph TBR. And so then I will come across them a little bit easier than in my 6,000 plus photo library right now. So that's definitely like one of the ways that I've started to like process like, okay, I came across this book. Is this something that I'm interested in? Could I add it to my TBR now, or is it something that I want to get to anytime soon? But I do like to keep them like captured somewhere, because I think they say that it's like 7 times that you have to see a book before you actually pick it up. And so then I'm just like, okay, maybe this is the 7th time that I've seen this book and I'll actually pick it up. I don't want to just like get rid of it, because I think a lot of books start to get lost in that. And so, yeah, that is usually how I start cycling my TBR. Now, since I'm also a mood reader, I'm usually in the middle of like 5 different books at a time. Like right now, I finally got it down to 4, but like I'm always reading at least 3 books. They're usually always like different, like genres or age categories or something like this. Usually just something different about them. Like right now, I'm reading an anthology. It's just fantasy short stories by Black authors. I can use those when I don't have a lot of time or a lot of mental energy to really want to pick up something. And then I'm reading Fever Star, which is just a regular epic fantasy when I do have a little bit more time to really dive into the world. And then I'm reading a fantasy romance where really the focus of the story is more of the romantic elements and not necessarily the external politics. And the last one that I'm reading is a sci-fi romance that I decided to pick up on audiobook because I also vary the format. I think 2 of the books I'm reading physically, one is an ebook and one is an audiobook. And I haven't really been reaching for audiobooks these days, but I wanted to try this author because it is a BIPOC sci-fi romance author. And something I don't think that I mentioned before is that like usually if it's a BIPOC author, specifically a black author, but definitely BIPOC in general, I will pick up the book or capture it somewhere just to see if I'm interested in it because I prioritize books by Black authors and other people of color. And so I feel like that captures how I do my day to day reading. It really just depends on what kind of day am I having? Am I having a mental day that, like, I can't really do anything but, like, go into a romance where it's just simple. They get together at the end. Like, there's nothing that I really need to focus on externally in terms of like the plot. Or do I have that energy and that excitement to read a fantasy book where I'm just like, oh, like I need to know what happens. Oh, this is how this connects. Like, it really depends on my mood and like my energy and what I have time for and what I pick up. And sometimes that makes me read books at a slower pace because I'm not in the mood for them. A lot of the books that I'm currently in the middle of, like I've been reading for a few months now because I just haven't been in the mood for them. And I think that's perfectly fine. I have had a little bit of a struggle trying to read a little bit faster, but I'm starting to just be okay with just the fact that I'm starting to read slower. I think I'm only going to read potentially half of the amount of books that I usually read in a year, and I think that's okay. So now we move on to the next section, which is what exactly is my reading taste? And I feel like to start off with, I feel like I should just say that my reading taste is always changing. Just based on what's happening in the community, what's happening in the world, what's happening in my personal life. I feel like being such a mood reader, like it's always changing. I distinctly remember purely reading like whatever. Like I was reading mysteries, I was reading fantasy books, I was reading just a lot of things when I was in elementary school. And then I remember when I was in middle school, I was pretty much like exclusively reading contemporary books. And I feel like that's just because this is around the time when like the really diverse books things were coming out, and I was like, oh, I do want to see myself in books more. And a lot of the books that were being published by Black authors about Black people were more contemporary books like Drama High or Nini Simone was another one, or Sharon M. Draper. And so I started leaning more into more of the contemporary side. And then I think when I was entering high school, I want to say, I'm not exactly sure when exactly this was, but I remember distinctly when the Hunger Games came out, I was in my sci-fi and fantasy bag. Like I literally loved it so much. And of course, like before, like in elementary school, I was reading those like magical books and stuff like that. Like always feel like I liked the magical elements of stories, but because I was looking for more diversity in the stories, I wasn't necessarily getting that when I was in middle school. But then when the Hunger Games came out, I was just like, I'm obsessed. Like, I need more stories like this. And of course, we got a lot of knockoffs, and that was something. But I feel like it never really made me not love sci fi and fantasy. And I feel like it just carried me through like today, basically, because sci-fi fantasy is like one of my favorite genres. But in high school, during my like sci-fi fantasy dystopia bag, I wasn't reading a lot of romance, and it wasn't actually until the Naked Readathon in 2021, I believe. That's when it first started, I think. But I actually tried adult romance for the first time, and I was reading Forbidden, um, what is the other one? A Princess in Theory. And I was like, oh, I really like these. And I will say that like joining the Naked Readathon did like spur me into adult romance, but it didn't become like my obsession, I will say. Like it didn't overtake my love of sci-fi and fantasy. But I did really enjoy those stories. So I started reading a lot more romances and I started to find more authors that I enjoy. And I feel like that's where we get into the space today, where like some of my top genres are sci-fi, fantasy, and romance. Like those are my top three that I read all the time. And so I say all of that because my reading taste has changed. And I think that it's okay for your reading taste to change as you develop as a person, as you find things that you love. And I'm a mood reader as well. So I definitely go through periods where I'm like, oh, I want more fantasy. I feel like that's where I'm at right now because romance is one of the least read genres that I have read this year. And so I feel like it's okay to be like fluid with like your reading taste. And if you do start to feel like, oh, I'm not really enjoying these books anymore, I think it's okay to just start trying something else. Because I think when I talk about like my reading taste, the important thing for me and how I curated my reading taste is that I try a little bit of everything. And I also, I think this is the important part, I know how to articulate what didn't work and what did work for me. Because I think that we can say, oh, like this fantasy book didn't work for me, but like, why didn't that fantasy book work for you? Because there's like so many like subgenres and divisions in each like overall genre. I think being able to articulate why this particular thing worked for you is important to understanding your reading taste. I know for me with fantasy books that I typically struggle with books that are over 600 pages. 500 I'm starting to get better at, but like I usually start DNFing books around the 250-page mark once it's over 600 pages because I just don't feel captivated. And that's just for me, like continually picking them up and understanding like just some of the patterns that I've had when I'm picking up some of these books. And of course, there are exceptions, but for the most part, I don't typically reach for books that are over 600 pages. 500 is even pushing it, but 600 definitely. Once it gets past that, then I'm just like, I'm probably not going to like it. And even within like the subgenres of fantasy, I don't necessarily like military fantasy. I I don't really care much for like battle scenes. Like once it starts to getting more into like the action things, like I just start to lose interest. I don't necessarily need all of the battle scenes and stuff like that. Like I know that about myself and I understand that like over time I have become a more character driven reader. And then we go into sci-fi. Like I don't really like hard sci-fi. I can't keep up with like the technology things. I don't necessarily like knowing the science behind a lot of things. I like the more futuristic, speculative aspect of it, more of the soft sci-fi of like exploring the anthropological, is that a word? I believe it is, but more the anthropological parts of developing a colony of human nature and stuff like that. Like I think that's why I enjoy Octavia Butler for the most part because she has some cringy relationships in her books, but I enjoy just that study of humanity. I enjoy that in sci-fi. I enjoy the exploration of different like class systems and how people rebel and stuff like that. And I think that's why dystopia really calls to me. And literally I came to these understandings about what my reading tastes are because I have tried a lot of different things. I've been seeing some authors like say that they don't know why a reader would like pick up a book that they know they probably won't like. But I feel like it's okay to pick up a book that you're not sure if you're gonna like or not because it helps you to understand as long as you can articulate it and explain why you did and did not like something, it helps you to understand like what you like. And I think that's important to pick up books that, oh, I may not like this. But then if it does surprise you, then there's maybe something that you did like. I feel like when I started getting into fantasy romances, I did read Akatar when it was released. I read it for a book club when I was in high school. And I didn't hate it, but I also wasn't like in love with it that like, oh, I want to go read all of the fantasy romances now. It wasn't until I read Heavy as the Head that I was like, oh, this is more along the lines of what I want in a fantasy romance. So while I read Avatar, like I wasn't completely turned off from the genre, but I wasn't like called to it. And it wasn't until like I read another fantasy romance that I'm like, oh, this is like what the genre could be. It could be more of that like slow burn. It could be filled with like politics and like stronger characters and like an actual male character that has a personality and things like that. But if I would have just wrote out the entire genre and I wouldn't have picked up a fantasy romance just because I didn't like Akatar, like I don't think that you should only reach for things that you know that you like. You should reach for things that you maybe on like the line with. Because I think it does help you with curating your reading taste. And like I mentioned before, that like my reading taste is definitely based on like how I'm currently feeling. I'm a mood reader. And so lately, these days, my attention span has been terrible. And so a lot of the books that I've been reading have been like shorter things, like usually less than 400 pages because I I cannot last over 500 pages right now, just with like other priorities taking place. And I don't know, I've been reaching for more shorter things. And I've also come to understand that just with even like my few favorites from 2024, that I love descriptive writing. I love when it's like more atmospheric, and especially when it's in like a fantasy paranormal world. Like I just love being immersed in a world, and I think that's one of the things that like really speak to my reading taste. And I know that I talked about fantasy and sci-fi, but I did want to just like take a little brief moment to talk about romance too, because like I said, in 2021 is when I really started getting into adult romances. And so I feel like I'm still a pretty new romance reader and I'm still trying to find my reading taste with it. And so I feel like this would be like a very interesting like case study on like how I'm starting to curate my reading taste. So one of the first thing about like curating my reading taste with the romance genre, first I know it's like very broad. I have not dived into every single subgenre in romance, and there's a lot that I probably won't because I just know instinctively that I'm not going to like it. I dived into a little bit of dark romance, but there's like I don't know, when it comes to like incest and stuff, like, no, I'm not doing that. It makes my skin crawl when I think about it. And so I just know that I'm probably not gonna like it or feel comfortable reading it. But as I think about like my reading taste with the romance genre, it has definitely changed. When I was first diving into the romance genre, I was just pretty much reading anything and everything that people were saying was popular. And I will say that like none of those authors, I don't think they're like necessarily like favorites of mine. I mean, Beverly Jenkins, of course, but like I feel like as I started to like dive more into like what is like the popular ones, I've started to understand like what are my tastes. And so I've come to understand that like tropes are not necessarily what's going to make me pick up a book. Like there's so many books with the same tropes that I'm just like, okay, but what makes your book unique? Like I don't understand what would make me want to pick up your book as opposed to this other one. You see that a lot with like enemies to lovers. Okay, all of these books have like enemies to lovers at this point. And then there's also like books that are like, oh, spice. Okay, majority of romance books have spice. Like I just those things aren't necessarily what's like making me want to pick up a book. And so when it comes to like discovering my taste with like romance, I'm just like, okay, these things are actively like turning me against the book. So I know that me as a romance reader, like those things aren't necessarily going to feed into my taste. But then when I start to think about, okay, this is what I like in my fantasy books, these are what I like in my sci fi books, I've started to understand that, okay, I think that I like more the external things happening as well, just like an interesting world or interesting character dynamics. And so that's when I started to really dive into like paranormal romance. And I wasn't really like the biggest fan of paranormal romance. Like that's never really been like my thing, but I have found that there are actually some that I really like when it has that more darker atmospheric tone. And then we already know how my taste with fantasy romance has been, so I won't go into too much depth about that, but like I definitely feel like I just need a little bit of extra when it comes to the romances. Like I want the world to actually make sense. I want like the politics or the external plot to be kind of like woven in to like the romance story. So like maybe it is that I like romantasy over fantasy romance. But it's only through me like picking up these books that I've started to understand, okay, this is what I like. This isn't what I like. Even coming into it with historical romance. It's only recently that I've started to understand that, oh, I think I actually do really like historical romance. It's not something that I usually pick up like just on my own free will, because a lot of the people that I follow, like I don't necessarily hear about a lot of these books, and I'm not like they're not just like front of mind. But then when I think about like the romance books that I have enjoyed, a lot of them have been historical. And I'm just like, oh, I think I might actually be a historical romance reader. So I actually think that I'm going to be reaching for historical romance a little bit more, because I find that I actually really do enjoy those books. And unfortunately, just like where I am right now, I don't think that contemporary is something that I've been reaching for these days, just because I do need that external like stuff happening. I need something interesting happening in the external plot for me to want to read 400 pages of people coming together. Like I said, my attention span is super short, and I don't think I can just read a love story between two people with like nothing externally happening. And usually in a historical context, like you have that interesting world that I could like focus on. Or in like fantasy, you have like an epic plot or something happening, unless it's like cozy fantasy, which isn't necessarily my thing because I like the stakes, but I like those external things happening outside of the romance, whether that's just the world or whether that's just like the plot happening. Like I need something extra in my romances. And I think that's why I haven't necessarily been like super in love with contemporary romances these days. And another thing about myself that I'm starting to understand just with like my reading taste with romances is that I'm not necessarily a spice reader. Like a lot of the marketing that I've been seeing these days have been a lot about the spice that's in a lot of books, and frankly, it's just not appealing to me. And it's not necessarily because like I'm like all closed minded or like I believe people should wait for sex until after marriage or anything like that. Like that's not what I believe at all. But like I just don't like reading those scenes in details. Like I like the tension in romantic books. Like I want to feel the romance, and not to say that sex isn't like romantic or anything, but like when I think about like the scenes that I actually like versus I don't like, I like when it is building that tension between those characters, when it is building that emotional connection between the characters. And sometimes I start to feel that in some of the books that I've been reading with like the romance genre is like every other chapter. And that's just not the kind of book that I want to read for romances. And I think that's why I've been starting to reach for a little bit more of the closed door romances, because I know it is that slow build up until maybe they have like their first kiss or they have like those little connection scenes, and I like seeing those moments. And I think that's also why I probably like historical romance, because you have the historical context of them not really being able to do anything before they get married to each other. But of course, like historical romance still includes those scenes like after. But I think because I have that build up to this is like the connection that these two characters have, I think that's why I can usually get on board with it. And then the last thing when I think about like my reading taste with romance books is that I need my male main character to actually have a personality. I'm sorry. Like I cannot just read like the perfect book boyfriend. I want to see the flaws. I want to see how these two characters actually find love in each other. Like what complements the other that makes them really like destined to be together. And I just need that in my romances. I need the male main character and the female main character to be strong characters, and I need them to be perfect for each other. I don't necessarily need them to just be perfect in the eyes of, I don't know, the reader. And so that is my reading taste in the romance genre, in the fantasy genre, and in the sci-fi genre. And of course, there are still other books that I read. Like I do pick up thrillers from time to time. I do pick up horror and stuff. Like I don't necessarily like limit the genres that I pick up, but when it comes to like my reading taste, like those are the top three that I usually reach for. But I know that this has been a very rambly video. I don't know if you guys found any value in discovering like how I find the books and talking through like my different reading tastes and just how I decide on what I read on a day-to-day basis. But it was an interesting project to like think through like, oh, this is how my reading taste has changed over the years. This is what I love and what I don't love in these specific genres, and how I decide on a day-to-day basis, like, oh, this is what I'm in the mood for. Like, it was definitely something interesting that I didn't really think about before. And so I appreciate Izzy for like creating this idea, because I feel like even as I was like talking through it, like I feel like I discovered even more things about like what I like and what I don't like. And I really like that like we're all like so different in how we do it and like what we like. Like I think that's the beauty of the book community, and why I really just like hearing people talk about like their experiences reading books, because we always interpret something like so different, or even if it's the same, but like just hearing people talk about books, it's like one of the things that I love about this community. Not the drama, because there's always some bookish drama happening, but like actually hearing people talk about books that they love or books that they hated, like I just I love it. It makes me happy. And I want people to enjoy more of the books that they read. I want to enjoy more of the books that I read. And so I think it's important, like Izzy said, to figure out what is your reading taste. And even doing this video, I feel like I've come to understand a little bit more about what should and should not be on my TBR, because I know what I like and I know what I don't like. And I think understanding like what you like and what you don't like is definitely very important when you're trying to find books that you enjoy. I have been struggling this year in terms of finding books that I enjoy. And I think that this videos helped me to articulate why certain books aren't working for me and what books I should start like reaching for, because I do know what I like and I know what I don't like. And so I need to stop reaching for the books that I don't necessarily think that I'm gonna like. And it's not necessarily like never reaching for those books, but I need to reach for more of the books that do call to me, do have that atmospheric writing, do have those strong character relationships. And I think because maybe I haven't really been like really paying attention to what I'm reading, I've just been like picking up books because they're on like a TBR or something. I feel like that's why my reading hasn't been necessarily the best this year. Not the complete reason, because there are some books that like they had so much potential, but like if I really sit back and think about what about the books are calling to me, what makes me think that, oh, this could be like a new favorite, then I'm just like, okay, maybe I would not have some of these books on my TBR. Maybe I would not be picking up some of these books. And so I really hope that by watching this video that you have taken away something that you can implement in your process, or even if it starts to get you to think about what even is your reading taste, so you know what books you should and should not pick up. Because at the end of the day, this is supposed to be for fun. I feel like a lot of us have been in a slump this year. We have not really been enjoying our reads, and I don't want that for us. Reading can be so much fun, and it should not feel like a chore. It should not feel like there's nothing good out there. And I do agree with Izzy from Happy for Now that like a lot of people just don't know their reading taste, or maybe they do and they're just not following it because they're falling into reading the hyped books. And so I feel like this was a good reminder for myself that I do know what I like, and that I should start reaching for those books. But I really hope that you have enjoyed it. Please let me know any of your thoughts to this video down below. Do you know your reading taste? Are you trying to discover your reading taste? Definitely let me know. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.